In the beginning, there was only darkness and silence. Then, a voice echoed through the void, "Let there be light." And creation unfolded, sky and sea, land and life, all brought forth by divine will. From dust, God formed Adam, then Eve, placing them in paradise. But temptation came, a single choice was made, and innocence was lost, cast from Eden. Humanity's journey began, a path of struggle, redemption, and destiny. Table of Nations, origin of the peoples. The beginning of a new humanity. After the great flood, only one family remained, Noah with his 3 sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth, along with their wives. They were the survivors, the only seed of humanity, and from them, the peoples of the world would multiply and spread. As they stepped out of the ark, they saw a new world, a barren land without traces of former cities. Everything began anew. Over time, their descendants grew numerous and began to spread across different lands. Noah's 3 sons became forefathers of 3 great lineages, the 3 main branches of humanity, from which came the Table of Nations. Japheth expanded north and west, laying foundations for Europe and Central Asia. Ham moved southward, building civilizations in Africa and the Middle East. Shem remained central, giving rise to many significant peoples, including the Jewish nation. The story of the Tower of Babel. After the Great Flood, humanity entered a new beginning. From Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, nations began to multiply and spread out. However, instead of obeying God's command, "Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth," they chose their own path, one that led to pride and rebellion. The story of the Tower of Babel is not only a historical event, but also a profound lesson about human nature and God's sovereignty. Babel was not merely about division. It was part of a greater plan, a plan to bring humanity back to God. Pride always leads to downfall. Humans sought to elevate themselves through their own strength, forgetting that they were merely creatures. Pride is the beginning of destruction. God is not manipulated by humans. No matter how grand human plans may be, ultimately, only God's intentions prevail. Dispersion was God's plan. He wanted humanity to fill the earth, but they resisted. In the end, God Himself made it happen. Language is a sign of division. From Babel onwards, humanity was no longer united, but became many nations with many different languages. The Call of Abram. After the Great Flood, Noah's descendants spread across the earth, forming nations, kingdoms, and civilizations. In Ur of the Chaldeans, a prosperous land in ancient Mesopotamia, there was a man named Abram. He was the son of Terah, a descendant of Shem, and a descendant of Noah. Abraham's story was not just about a geographical journey, but a journey of faith. God calls each person out of their comfort zone. Faith is stepping forward without knowing what lies ahead. God's promises do not depend on circumstances, but on His power. All blessings come from obedience. From an old man without children, Abram became the patriarch of a great nation. From a journey without a map, he laid the foundation for humanity's history of salvation. And thousands of years later, from his lineage, a man would be born, the Savior, Jesus Christ, who would bring blessings to all nations on earth, fulfilling God's initial promise. Abram and Lot separate. After obeying God's call, Abram, along with his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and a large company of people, left their homeland of Ur. They passed through Haran and continued their journey to Canaan, the land God had promised to Abram's descendants. Abram did not travel empty-handed. He had many sheep, cattle, camels, servants, and his nephew Lot did as well. Both became wealthy due to God's blessings, but this prosperity brought about a new challenge. The herdsmen of Abram and Lot began to argue, competing for the best pastures and the freshest water sources. The conflict threatened to escalate, risking the familial bond between Abram and Lot. Abram gently said, "We are close relatives. We shouldn't allow disputes to divide us. Let's separate the land to live in peace. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. If you choose the right, I will go to the left." This proposal was humble and generous. Although Abram was the elder with the right to choose first, he let Lot decide freely. He did not cling to possessions because he believed that his blessings came from God, not from the land. Abram rescues Lot. In the early days when Abram and his nephew Lot lived together in the land of Canaan, both had many herds of livestock, and their wealth increased day by day. Since the land was not spacious enough for them to continue living together, they decided to part ways peacefully. Lot chose the fertile valley near the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, while Abram settled in the land of Hebron, where God had blessed him. However, a great upheaval occurred. A war broke out across the land. One survivor fled from the battle and came to Hebron to deliver urgent news to Abram. Lot, your nephew, has been captured. The enemy has plundered Sodom and taken him away. Upon hearing this, Abram did not hesitate. He was not a king, nor did he have a mighty army, but he had 318 trained servants, loyal men who had been prepared for battle. Along with his allies, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, Abram devised a daring rescue plan. The enemy was taken by surprise and fled in panic. Abram and his men pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. Under the night sky, Abram's small force set out, tracking the enemy for over 200 miles, crossing mountains and treacherous terrain. They did not fight for personal gain, but for justice, for loyalty, and for their faith in God. In the end, Abram reclaimed all the plunder, rescuing Lot along with his household and all the stolen possessions. On the journey back from victory, the king of Sodom came out to meet Abram at the Valley of Shave. But more importantly, a special figure came to greet him, Melchizedek, the king of Salem and a priest of the Most High God. Melchizedek brought bread and wine and blessed Abram, saying, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. Blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." With a heart full of gratitude, Abram gave Melchizedek a tenth of all the recovered goods, expressing his reverence for God. The king of Sodom then offered Abram all the wealth he had recovered, asking only for the people to be returned to him. But Abram firmly refused. "I have sworn an oath to the Lord, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will not take anything that belongs to you, not even a thread or a sandal strap, so that you cannot say, 'I have made Abram rich.'" Abram accepted only what was due to those who had fought with him, but he kept nothing for himself. God's covenant with Abram. On a quiet night, when the dark sky was adorned with countless twinkling stars, Abram sat beside his tent, contemplating the promises of God. He had left his homeland, departed from his family, and embarked on a journey with an unknown future ahead. Yet, his heart remained steadfast in faith toward the one who had called him. Then, the Lord appeared to Abram in a vision and said, "Abram, do not be afraid. I am your shield. Your reward will be very great." But Abram, troubled by concerns about the future, responded, "O Lord God, what will you give me, since I remain childless? The one who will inherit my household is Eliezer of Damascus, a servant in my house." However, God firmly replied, "This man will not be your heir, but a son from your own body will be your rightful heir." Then he led Abram outside and said, "Look up at the sky and count the stars. If you can count them, so shall your descendants be." Upon hearing this, Abram's heart was filled with unwavering faith. He trusted in the Lord's promise, and God credited it to him as righteousness. The sacred covenant. To establish his covenant with Abram, God commanded him to prepare a sacrificial offering. Abram obeyed, bringing a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. He cut the animals in half and arranged the pieces opposite each other, except for the birds, which he did not divide. As the sun set, a deep sleep fell upon Abram. In his slumber, he saw a vision of great dread and overwhelming darkness. Then the Lord spoke to him, "Your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land, where they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. But I will judge the nation that enslaves them, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. As for you, you will go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a good old age." After the Lord had spoken, A smoking firepot and a blazing torch passed between the pieces of the sacrificed animals. This was the sign that God had made a covenant with Abram. From that moment, the sacred covenant between God and Abram was established. The Lord promised him descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, a land filled with blessings, and a future of great glory. He declared, "To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites." Later, as a sign of this covenant, God changed his name from Abram to Abraham, meaning father of many nations, or through him, all nations would be blessed. Thus, God fulfilled his covenant, a perpetual covenant, bringing hope and promises for generations to come. Hagar and Ishmael. Abraham and Sarai, later renamed Sarah, had been promised by God that they would have numerous descendants. However, as the years passed, Sarah remained childless. In her waiting and impatience, Sarah decided to take matters into her own hands. She had an Egyptian servant named Hagar, so Sarah gave Hagar, her Egyptian maidservant, to Abraham, hoping that the child born from her would be considered Sarah's own. As expected, Hagar became pregnant, but the moment she realized she would be the mother of her master's child, she began to despise Sarah. This angered Sarah, and she treated Hagar harshly. Unable to endure such mistreatment, Hagar fled into the wilderness. In the vast desert, overwhelmed by fear and despair, an angel of the Lord appeared to Hagar beside a spring of water. The angel asked, "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" Hagar replied, "I am fleeing from my mistress, Sarai." The angel advised her to return and submit to Sarah. Then, the angel delivered a promise from God. "I will greatly multiply your descendants, so that they will be too numerous to count. You will bear a son, and you shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. Ishmael will be a strong man, living freely like a wild donkey in the desert. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him, but he will live independently in the presence of all his brothers." Moved by God's mercy, Hagar called him, "the one who sees me," because she had encountered the Lord in her distress. She then returned to Sarah and Abraham, and later gave birth to Ishmael. The covenant of circumcision, the sign of God's promise. The promise reaffirmed. Many years had passed since God called Abram out of his homeland and promised him descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Yet despite his old age, he had only one son, Ishmael, the child of Hagar, the maidservant. One day, when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, "I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will greatly increase your descendants." Abram immediately fell face down in reverence. Then God continued, "Behold, my covenant with you is this: you will be the father of many nations. No longer shall your name be Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you the father of many nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful. Nations and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant with you and your descendants after you, an everlasting covenant. I will be your God and the God of your descendants." Then God designated the land of Canaan as an everlasting inheritance for Abraham's descendants. The sign of the covenant, the law of circumcision. To establish this covenant, God gave Abraham a clear sign for him and his descendants. "You and your descendants must keep this covenant. Every male among you shall be circumcised. This will be the sign of the covenant between me and you. When a baby boy is 8 days old, he must be circumcised, whether born in your household or bought as a servant from a foreigner. Anyone who refuses circumcision shall be cut off from my people, for he has broken my covenant." This command was not only for Abraham, but for all his descendants for generations to come. Afterward, God also changed Sarai's name to Sarah, declaring that she would become the mother of many nations. But Abraham questioned, "O Lord, I am 100 years old, and Sarah is 90. How can she bear a child? May Ishmael be blessed before you." But God answered, No, Sarah, your wife, will bear you a son, and you shall name him Isaac. I will establish my everlasting covenant with him and his descendants. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will bless him, make him fruitful, and greatly multiply him. 12 rulers will come from him, and he will become a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you at this time next year." That very day, Abraham obeyed God's command. He and all the males in his household, including his son Ishmael and his servants, underwent circumcision according to God's decree. At that time, Abraham was 99 years old, and Ishmael was 13 when they were circumcised, the meaning of the covenant. Circumcision was not merely a physical ritual, but a sacred mark, signifying Israel's belonging to God. Though Ishmael received blessings, the promise of a spiritual lineage, a nation born of faith, would come through Isaac. From Isaac, the covenant would continue through Jacob, then through the nation of Israel, and ultimately find its fulfillment in Jesus Christ. The covenant of circumcision is one of the most significant covenants in the Bible, confirming God's divine selection of Abraham and his descendants. It serves as a reminder of his faithfulness and the promise of a great nation, not only by blood but also by faith. Thus, God established an eternal covenant, a promise that will never fade. The three visitors, the promiser affirmed. A detained encounter. On a scorching afternoon, while Abraham was sitting at the entrance of his tent in the oak groves of Mamre, he looked up and saw 3 unfamiliar men standing nearby. Without hesitation, he quickly stood up and ran to welcome them with warm hospitality. Bowing low to the ground, he said, "My lords, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let me bring you some water to wash your feet and rest under the tree. I will also bring some bread for you to refresh yourselves, and then you may continue your journey." The 3 visitors accepted his invitation. These 3 men seemed to carry a divine mission. One of them, with a majestic presence and radiant eyes, spoke to Abraham. "This time next year, you will become the father of a son, even though your wife is old." Abraham, astonished and bewildered, asked, "How can this be, since I am already old, and my wife as well?" The visitor responded, "I am the Lord, and my word will be fulfilled. Soon, Sarah, your wife, will bear a son." These words filled both Abraham and Sarah with amazement, but the Lord continued, explaining that although they were well advanced in age, nothing is impossible when God has decreed it. Abraham intercedes for Sodom. When the 3 visitors rose to continue their journey towards Sodom, Abraham walked with them for a while to see them off. Then the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? For I have chosen him so that through him all nations on earth shall be blessed." At that moment, the Lord revealed to Abraham that he was about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because their wickedness had reached its peak. Abraham, filled with compassion, boldly pleaded with God, "Lord, if there are 50 righteous people in the city, will you still destroy it? Surely you would not sweep away the righteous along with the wicked." The Lord replied, "If I find 50 righteous people in the city, I will spare the entire place for their sake." Abraham continued to intercede, lowering the number to 45, then 40, 30, 20, and finally 10. Each time, the Lord answered, "If I find 10 righteous people in the city, I will not destroy it." When the conversation ended, 2 angels descended to Sodom. While Abraham stood watching them go, his heart heavy with sorrow, knowing that the city had already sunk too deep into sin. For a long time, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah had been infamous, not for their prosperity or beauty, but for the rampant wickedness of their inhabitants. Their corruption had reached an unbearable level, and the outcry against their sins had risen to the ears of God. The Lord declared, "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great. Their sin is grievous. I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me." So, the Lord sent 2 angels to Sodom to investigate the matter. The visit of the angels. That evening, as the sun was setting, the 2 angels entered Sodom. At the city gate, Lot, Abraham's nephew, saw them. Rushing forward, he bowed low and said, "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house. Spend the night and wash your feet. Then, in the morning, you may continue your journey." But the two visitors replied, "No, we will spend the night in the square." Knowing the dangers lurking in Sodom, especially at night, Lot insisted. Eventually, they agreed to stay in his house. He prepared a meal for them. But before they could rest, evil came knocking, the wickedness of Sodom. Before Lot and his guests could retire for the night, his house was surrounded. Men from every part of the city, young and old, gathered and pounded on the door. They shouted, "Lot, bring those men out to us so we can abuse them." Hearing this, Lot was horrified. He stepped outside, shutting the door behind him, and pleaded, "Please, my brothers, do not commit this wickedness. These men are under my protection." But the crowd grew angry and defiant. "You are an outsider, and yet you dare judge us? We will treat you worse than them." They rushed forward, attempting to break down the door. Immediately, the two angels reached out, pulled Lot inside, and shut the door. Then, they struck the men outside with blindness, causing them to stumble in confusion, unable to find the entrance, the warning to escape. Then, the angels said to Lot, "Take your family and get out of this city immediately, for we are about to destroy it. The outcry against its wickedness has reached the Lord, and he has sent us to bring its destruction." At dawn, the angels urged Lot, "Hurry, take your wife and your 2 daughters and leave, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city." But Lot hesitated. So, in God's mercy, the angels took hold of him, his wife, and his 2 daughters, and led them out of the city. When they had reached safety, one of the angels commanded, "Flee for your lives. Do not look back. Do not stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains, or you will be destroyed." Lot, afraid that he would not make it to the mountains in time, begged to flee to a small town nearby called Zor. God granted his request. As Lot and his family reached Zor, the sun was just rising. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Then, from the heavens, the Lord rained down fire and sulfur upon Sodom and Gomorrah. Flames consumed the entire cities, houses, fields, livestock, and every single inhabitant. The once bustling and vibrant cities were reduced to ashes, leaving behind nothing but a land charred and desolate. Lot's wife turns into a pillar of salt. The angels had warned, "Do not look back." But as they fled, Lot's wife could not resist her curiosity and longing. She turned and looked back at the city. Immediately, she was turned into a pillar of salt. That was the price of disobedience to God's command. Abraham witnesses the destruction. That morning, from the oak groves of Mamre, Abraham looked down toward the valley. Before his eyes was a terrifying scene. Thick smoke rose from Sodom and Gomorrah, like the smoke of a massive furnace. Yet the Lord remembered Abraham's plea, and for his sake, he rescued Lot from destruction. The lesson of Sodom and Gomorrah. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah stands as a clear testament to God's justice. He is merciful, but he is also righteous. When sin reaches its fullest measure, judgment becomes inevitable. Lot was spared because he still retained some righteousness, but his wife perished because she clung to the past. Thus, Sodom and Gomorrah became symbols of divine judgment, a warning for all generations about the consequences of wickedness and the importance of obedience to God. Abram and Abimelech, God's protection. The journey to Gerar. After witnessing the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham continued his journey. He left Mamre and traveled south to the land of Gerar, which was under the rule of King Abimelech. Fearing that the people there might kill him to take Sarah, his wife, Abraham told everyone that she was his sister. As he had anticipated, when news of Sarah's beauty reached Abimelech, the king sent his men to bring her to his palace. However, Abraham did not expect that this time, God himself would directly intervene to protect Sarah. God intervenes. That night, God appeared to Abimelech in a dream and warned him, "You are as good as dead because of the woman you have taken, for she is a married woman." Terrified, Abimelech pleaded, "Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did he not tell me, 'She is my sister'? And did she not also say, 'He is my brother'? I have done this with a clear conscience and clean hands." God responded, "Yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience, and that is why I kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you so that you will live. But if you do not return her, you and all who belong to you will surely die." Abimelech confronts Abraham. Early the next morning, Abimelech summoned all his officials and told them about his terrifying dream. Everyone was filled with fear at God's warning. Immediately, Abimelech sent for Abraham and rebuked him. "What have you done to us? How have I sinned against you that you would bring such a great guilt upon my kingdom? You have done things to me that should never be done." Then he asked, "What was your reason for doing this?" Abraham replied, "I thought to myself, surely there is no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife. When God called me to wander from my father's household, I said to her, 'This is how you can show your love for me. Wherever we go, say that I am your brother.'" Abimelech's restoration. Hearing this, Abimelech not only returned Sarah to Abraham, but also gave him many gifts. Then the king said to Abraham, "My land is before you. Live wherever you please." Afterward, Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female servants, so that they could bear children again. Lesson from Abram and Abimelech. The story of Abraham and Abimelech reveals that God is not only just but also full of mercy, patience, and forgiveness for those who seek Him. Abraham was tested. One day, as the dawn was breaking, God appeared to Abraham and spoke a terrifying test. "Abraham." He answered, "Here I am." God said, "Take Isaac, your only beloved son, and go to the land of Moriah. There, offer him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will show you." The next morning, Abraham rose early, prepared his donkey, split wood for the burnt offering, and called 2 servants along with Isaac. Together, they set out for the place God had designated. 3 days passed as they traveled through desolate lands. Along the way, Isaac, now a wise young boy, looked at his father and asked, "Father, the wood is here, and so is the fire, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham swallowed his sorrow, but with a voice full of faith he answered, "My son, God will provide the lamb for the burnt offering." They continued on until they reached the place God had shown them. Upon arriving at the foot of Mount Moriah, Abraham said to his 2 servants, "Stay here with the donkey. My son and I will go up there to worship, and then we will return to you." Then he took the wood and placed it on Isaac's shoulders, while he himself carried the fire and the knife. Together, they ascended the mountain. Upon reaching the place, Abraham built an altar, arranged the wood, then turned to Isaac. With a heart filled with pain yet unwavering obedience, he bound his son's hands and feet and laid him on the altar. His hand trembled as he drew out the knife. At that very moment, a voice called from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." Immediately he answered, "Here I am." The angel of the Lord said, "Do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not harm him. Now I know that you truly fear God, for you have not withheld your only son from me." The testing of Abraham is not merely a story of obedience, but a profound testament to God's faithfulness and provision. He never breaks His promises. He tests us not to harm us, but to strengthen our faith. And so, Abraham became the father of faith, an eternal example for all generations of trust and obedience to God. The death of Sarah, Abraham's love and respect. Sarah, the beloved wife of Abraham, who had walked with him on the journey of faith, finally reached the end of her days. She passed away in Hebron, in the land of Canaan, at the age of 127. Hearing the news of his wife's passing, Abraham was speechless. Throughout the years, they had endured many trials together, from leaving their homeland to receiving God's promises, from the joy of Isaac's birth to the challenges that tested their faith. Now Sarah was no longer by his side. In sorrow, Abraham came to his wife's body and wept for her. After mourning, he resolved to do something important, to find a worthy resting place for Sarah. Though God had promised to give the land of Canaan to his descendants at that time, Abraham was still only a foreigner dwelling in the land. He did not own a single piece of it. Therefore, he went to the Hittites, the people who governed the land, and said, "I am only a foreigner among you. Please sell me a burial site so that I may lay my wife to rest." The Hittites respected Abraham because he was a man of great reputation in the land. They replied, "You are a prince of God among us. Bury your wife in the finest tomb among us. None of us will refuse you." However, Abraham did not want to receive the land as a gift. He wanted to buy it to have rightful ownership. He offered to purchase the cave of Machpelah, a field belonging to Ephron, son of Zohar. Ephron said, "No, my lord, I give you both the field and the cave. In the presence of my people, I grant it to you." But Abraham insisted on paying the full price for the land. Eventually, Ephron agreed to sell it for 400 shekels of silver, a substantial sum in those days. Once the transaction was completed, Abraham brought Sarah's body to the cave of Machpelah in the field near Mamre, which is Hebron, and buried her there. For the first time, Abraham owned a piece of land in Canaan, but it was a burial ground for the departed. Even so, Sarah's tomb was proof that God's promise would come true. Later, the cave of Machpelah also became the resting place of Abraham himself, as well as Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah, the patriarchs and matriarchs of Israel. Sarah's death was not only the loss of a wife and a mother, but also a turning point in Abraham's journey of faith. Isaac and Rebekah. After Sarah passed away, Abraham grew older and weaker, yet his heart remained burdened with one concern. His beloved son Isaac still had no wife, though God had promised that Abraham's descendants would become a great nation. For this promise to be fulfilled, Isaac needed a worthy wife. She could not be from the idol-worshipping Canaanites, but had to come from Abraham's own family, someone who feared God. So Abraham called Eliezer, his most faithful servant, and entrusted him with an important task. "Place your hand under my thigh and swear before God, you must not take a wife for Isaac from the Canaanites. Go to my homeland, to my father's house, and find a wife for my son." Eliezer hesitated and asked, "What if the woman refuses to come with me to this land? Should I take Isaac back there?" But Abraham firmly declared, "No. God has promised this land to my descendants. He will send his angel before you and help you find a wife for Isaac. But if she refuses to come, you will be released from this oath. However, under no circumstances must you take Isaac back there." So Eliezer set out on his journey, taking 10 camels and many valuable gifts, heading toward Mesopotamia, Abraham's homeland. After a long journey, Eliezer arrived in the city of Nahor, near a well outside the city. As evening approached, the time when women came to draw water, he prayed to God with hope. "Lord, God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show kindness to my master. Let it be that the young woman who offers me water and also offers to water my camels be the one you have chosen for Isaac." Before he had even finished praying, Rebekah appeared. She was the daughter of Bethuel, the granddaughter of Nahor, Abraham's own family lineage. Rebekah was beautiful, pure, and had never belonged to any man. She approached the well, filled her jar with water, and Eliezer quickly ran to her, saying, "Please give me a little water from your jar." Rebekah immediately lowered her jar and said, "Drink, my lord." After he had drunk, she added, "I will also draw water for your camels until they have had enough." She hurriedly fetched water, tirelessly drawing until all 10 camels were satisfied. When the camels had finished drinking, Eliezer took out a gold nose ring and 2 gold bracelets and gave them to Rebekah. Then he asked, "Whose daughter are you? Is there room in your father's house for us to stay?" Rebekah answered, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, the granddaughter of Nahor. We have plenty of straw and fodder for the camels, and there is also a place for you to stay the night." Hearing this, Eliezer bowed down and worshipped God, saying, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has led me to my master's relatives. Thank you." Rebekah ran home to tell her family everything that had happened. When her brother Laban heard her story and saw the precious jewelry on her hands, he quickly ran out to meet Eliezer and invited him into their home. That evening, Eliezer recounted the entire story, from Abraham's instructions to his prayer and the sign that God had given. After listening, Rebekah's father, Bethuel, along with her mother and brother Laban, said, "This is from the Lord. We cannot say anything more. If God has chosen Rebekah for Isaac, let her go with you." Rebekah. The next morning, Rebekah's family wanted her to stay a few more days before leaving, but Eliezer pleaded, "Please do not delay me, for God has made everything successful. Let me go today." So they called Rebekah and asked, "Will you go with this man?" Without hesitation, she answered, "I will go." And so she and her maidservants set out, leaving her homeland to meet the husband she had never seen. As they neared Canaan, Isaac was out in the fields meditating in the evening. Lifting his eyes, he saw the approaching caravan. At the same time, Rebekah saw a man in the distance and asked Eliezer, "Who is that man coming toward us?" Eliezer replied, "That is my master Isaac." Upon hearing this, Rebekah took her veil and covered her face, following the customs of the time. Isaac approached, and Eliezer told him everything. Then Isaac took Rebekah into the tent of his mother, Sarah, and she became his wife. The story of Isaac and Rebekah is a tale of love and a reminder of God's guidance and provision in life. The death of Abraham, the journey of a father of faith. Abraham lived a meaningful life, a life of faith, obedience, and the fulfillment of God's promises. From the day he left his homeland of Ur at God's calling to the moment he saw his son Isaac born and endured many trials, he became the father of many nations, just as God had promised. After his wife Sarah passed away, Abraham took another wife named Keturah, who bore him several sons: Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shuah. These sons later became the ancestors of various nations. Despite having many sons, Abraham never forgot that God's covenant and promise would be fulfilled through Isaac. As he grew old, Abraham sensed that his final days were near. He decided to set everything in order in his household. He gathered all his sons and distributed his wealth among them. However, he gave Isaac the most important inheritance because Isaac was the heir of God's promise. The other sons received gifts and were sent to the land of the east, away from Canaan, the land God had reserved for Isaac and his descendants. Finally, after a long life of 175 years, Abraham breathed his last. He departed in peace, not in fear or regret, but with full assurance that God had kept his promises. After his passing, Isaac and Ishmael, Abraham's two eldest sons, came together to bury their father. They laid his body in the cave of Machpelah, the same place where Sarah, Isaac's mother, had been buried. After Abraham's death, God continued to bless Isaac, who was chosen to carry on the covenant. Isaac settled near the well of Lahai-Roi, and from him, the nation of Israel began to flourish. Meanwhile, Ishmael and Abraham's other sons also became the ancestors of many nations. Abraham was not only the patriarch of Israel, but also the father of all who have faith. Though he passed away, God's promise continued through Isaac, Jacob, and the people of Israel. From this lineage, Jesus Christ came to bring salvation to all humanity, fulfilling the original covenant God made with Abraham. Thus, Abraham's life did not end in the grave, but continues to live on in the faith of millions across the world. Isaac and Abimelech, patience and God's blessings. After Abraham passed away, Isaac continued to live in Canaan and inherited the promise that God had given to his father. But then, a great famine struck the land, threatening the survival of Isaac and his family. In this situation, Isaac planned to go down to Egypt to find a way to sustain himself, just as his father had done before. However, as he was considering this, God spoke to him, "Do not go down to Egypt. Stay in the land that I will show you. Live here, and I will be with you and bless you. For I will give all this land to you and your descendants, and I will keep the covenant I made with Abraham, your father. Your offspring will be as numerous as the stars in the sky, and through you, all nations on earth will be blessed." So Isaac obeyed God and went to Gerar, a land ruled by Abimelech, the king of the Philistines. Even though he lived among the Philistines, God kept his promise and abundantly blessed Isaac. He planted crops in Gerar, and in that same year his harvest yielded 100-fold. His livestock and servants multiplied, making him extremely wealthy. But Isaac's prosperity caused jealousy among the Philistines. As a result, they filled up all the wells that Abram, Isaac's father, had dug while he was alive. Theo. Eventually, King Abimelech came to Isaac and said, "Move away from us, for you have become too powerful for us." Though he was forced to leave, Isaac did not argue or resist. He quietly departed and sought another place to settle. When he left Gerar, Isaac and his people went to a valley and reopened the wells that his father had dug but had been filled in by the Philistines. When they dug a new well, the Philistine herdsmen came and quarreled over it, saying, "The water belongs to us." So Isaac named the well Esek, meaning dispute. He then dug another well, but the Philistines came again and argued over it. So he named it Sitnah, meaning hostility. Not wanting conflict, Isaac moved on and dug another well. This time, no one quarreled over it. He named it Rehoboth, meaning spacious, and said, "Now the Lord has given us room, and we will flourish in this land." Later, Isaac went up to Beersheba, the place where God had previously appeared to Abraham. There, God spoke to him again, "I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bless you and increase your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham." Upon hearing this, Isaac built an altar, called on the name of the Lord, and set up his camp there. Not long after, King Abimelech came from Gerar to visit Isaac, along with his military commander Phicol and other officials. Surprised, Isaac asked, "Why have you come to me when you previously sent me away?" Abimelech sincerely replied, "We saw that the Lord is with you, so we want to make a peace treaty with you. Swear that you will not harm us, just as we have not harmed you, but have only let you go in peace. Now you are blessed by God." Isaac agreed. Soon after, Isaac's servants came to report that they had dug a new well and found water. He named the well Sheba, Oath, and from then on, the place became known as Beersheba, Well of the Oath. The story of Isaac and Abimelech is not only about conflict and reconciliation, but also a testimony to God's provision and faithfulness. When we walk in faith, endure with patience, and pursue peace, God will bless us abundantly, just as he did with Isaac. Jacob receives Esau's blessing. When Rebekah, the wife of Isaac, was pregnant, God had already foretold the fate of her children. Even before Jacob and Esau were born, their destinies were set. Esau and Jacob were twin brothers, but their personalities were entirely different. Esau was a strong hunter, wandering in the open fields, and was favored by his father. Jacob was quiet, staying near the tents, and was loved by his mother. One day, after returning from hunting, exhausted and famished, Esau saw Jacob cooking a fragrant pot of red lentil stew. He immediately said, "Please let me have some of that red stew, for I am starving." But Jacob saw an opportunity and said, "First, sell me your birthright." Esau, too hungry to think carefully, replied, "Look, I am about to die. What good is a birthright to me?" Jacob insisted, "Swear to me first." So Esau swore an oath, selling his birthright to Jacob in exchange for a single meal. From that moment, Jacob legally held the right to inherit both the family's wealth and the blessing. However, for the birthright to take full effect, Jacob needed to receive the blessing from his father, Isaac. As Isaac grew old and his eyesight faded, he knew that his time was nearing its end. One day, he called Esau and said, "My son, go hunt some game and prepare for me the delicious food that I love, so that I may eat and bless you before I die." Esau immediately went out to hunt, but Rebekah overheard the conversation. Knowing that God had chosen Jacob to receive the blessing, she devised a bold plan to help Jacob take Esau's place. She called Jacob and said, "Listen to me. Go and get 2 young goats from the flock, and I will prepare a meal just the way your father likes it. You will bring it to him, so that he may bless you before Esau returns." But Jacob hesitated. "Esau is a hairy man, while I have smooth skin. If my father touches me, he will know that I am deceiving him, and instead of receiving a blessing, I will be cursed." Rebekah reassured him, "Just do as I say. If anything happens, I will take the blame for you." So Jacob brought the goats, and Rebekah prepared a delicious meal. She dressed Jacob in Esau's best clothes and covered his hands and neck with goatskins to make him appear hairy like Esau. Jacob then entered his father's tent and said, "Father." Isaac, his vision blurred, asked, "Who are you?" Jacob replied, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you asked. Please sit up and eat the meat I have prepared so that you may bless me." But Isaac was suspicious. "How did you hunt so quickly?" Jacob answered, "Because God helped me." Still uncertain, Isaac said, "Come closer so that I may touch you and know if you are truly Esau." Jacob approached, and Isaac felt his hands. Then he said, "The voice is Jacob's, but the hands are Esau's." He then smelled Jacob's clothing, and recognizing the scent of the fields from Esau's garments, he was convinced. So he blessed Jacob. "May God give you the dew of heaven, the richness of the earth, and abundance of grain and wine. May nations serve you, and peoples bow down to you. May you be lord over your brothers, and may the descendants of your mother bow before you. Whoever curses you will be cursed, and whoever blesses you will be blessed." Thus, Jacob officially received the blessing that was intended for Esau. Just as Jacob left the tent, Esau returned from his hunt, carrying the game he had caught. He entered the tent and said, "Father, please eat the meat I have prepared so that you may bless me." Isaac trembled violently and asked, "Who are you?" Esau replied, "I am Esau, your firstborn." Isaac suddenly realized he had been deceived. He shook with shock and exclaimed, "Then who was it that brought me meat earlier? I have already eaten and blessed him, and indeed, he shall be blessed." Esau cried out in anguish and pleaded, "Father, please bless me too." But Isaac replied, "Your brother came deceitfully and has taken your blessing." Esau, filled with bitterness, shouted, "His name is Jacob, meaning supplanter, and truly he has lived up to it. He took my birthright, and now he has stolen my blessing." From that moment, Esau bore deep hatred toward Jacob and swore, "After my father dies, I will kill Jacob." And so, through Jacob, God's chosen lineage continued, leading to the birth of the nation of Israel and ultimately the coming of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Jacob's dream at Bethel. After deceiving Esau and taking his blessing, Jacob knew that his brother was furious and had sworn to kill him. Rebekah, Jacob's mother, feared for his life, so she urged him to flee to the house of her brother Laban in Paddan Aram. Before leaving, Jacob went to see his father, Isaac. Though Isaac knew he had been deceived, he still confirmed that Jacob was the one chosen to inherit God's covenant. He blessed his son and instructed him, "Do not marry a woman from Canaan. Go to the house of your uncle Laban and take one of his daughters as your wife. May God Almighty bless you, make you fruitful, and increase your numbers so that you become a great nation. May He grant you the blessing of Abraham, so that you and your descendants may inherit this land, the land that God promised to your grandfather." With his father's blessing, Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran, carrying many uncertainties in his heart. After a long day of walking, as the sun set, Jacob became weary. He found a place to rest in an open field, took a stone as a pillow, and lay down to sleep under the sky. That night, God appeared to him in a miraculous dream. Jacob saw a ladder reaching from the earth to the heavens, with angels of God ascending and descending on it, as if forming a connection between heaven and earth. At the top of the ladder, God appeared in glory and spoke to Jacob, "I am the Lord, the God of Abraham and Isaac. The land where you are lying, I will give to you and your descendants. Your offspring will be as numerous as the dust of the earth, and will spread out to the east, west, north, and south. Through you and your descendants, all nations on earth will be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have fulfilled what I have promised you." That dream was like a beacon of light, dispelling all of Jacob's fears and worries. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight shone over the field, Jacob awoke in awe and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. This is truly the gate of heaven." He took the stone he had used as a pillow, set it up as a pillar, and poured oil on it to consecrate the place as holy. He named the place Bethel, meaning house of God. Then Jacob made a vow, "If God is with me, watches over me on this journey, gives me food to eat and clothes to wear, and brings me safely back to my father's house, then the Lord shall be my God. This stone I have set up will be the house of God, and I will give 1/10 of everything he gives me." After that, he continued his journey to Haran, with faith that God was with him and would fulfill his promises. Jacob's dream at Bethel was a pivotal spiritual experience in his life. It was the moment he realized that God was always with him, no matter where he went or what he did. And so, Jacob left Bethel with a heart full of faith, ready to enter a new chapter of his life, a journey that would lead him to become the patriarch of the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob marries Leah and Rachel. The sun slowly set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky of Haran with brilliant shades of orange. Jacob, a traveler from Canaan, stood by the well, his eyes fixed on the young woman approaching with a flock of sheep. It was Rachel, the daughter of Laban. Rachel led her sheep to the well, but a large stone covered its mouth, requiring several men to roll it away. Without hesitation, Jacob stepped forward and single-handedly rolled the stone aside. Then he drew water for Rachel's flock, his eyes glowing with admiration and joy. Only then did he speak. "I am Jacob, son of Isaac, the grandson of Laban, your father." Hearing this, Rachel was overjoyed and quickly ran home to deliver the news. Laban, her shrewd father, hurried out to meet Jacob, embracing him warmly and welcoming him into his home as if he were a beloved family member. Jacob stayed with Laban's family, working in the fields and tending the livestock as if he were one of his own sons. When the 7 years were completed, he approached Laban and said, "Give me Rachel as my wife, for my time of service is complete." A grand wedding feast was arranged. Music filled the air, wine flowed generously, and the entire region of Haran was immersed in celebration. As night fell, the bride was brought into Jacob's tent, her face concealed beneath a traditional veil. But when the first light of dawn pierced through the tent, Jacob discovered a shocking truth. The woman beside him was not Rachel but Leah, her older sister. Furious, Jacob stormed to Laban. "What have you done to me? I worked for you for Rachel. Why have you deceived me?" Laban, unfazed, replied, "In our land, we do not give the younger daughter in marriage before the elder. Complete Leah's bridal week, and then I will give you Rachel as well, on the condition that you work for me another 7 years. Jacob bitterly realized he had fallen into Laban's trap, yet for the love of Rachel, he could not walk away. He accepted the condition, fulfilled Leah's bridal week, and then married Rachel, the woman he had loved from the very first moment he saw her. Leah loved Jacob, but his heart belonged entirely to Rachel. Seeing this, God had compassion on Leah and opened her womb, allowing her to conceive, while Rachel remained barren. Leah bore 4 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, but still could not win Jacob's full love. Rachel, heartbroken over her inability to bear children, gave her servant Bilhah to Jacob as a concubine. Bilhah bore 2 sons, Dan and Naphtali. Not wanting to be outdone, Leah also gave her servant Zilpah to Jacob, and Zilpah bore 2 sons, Gad and Asher. Finally, after years of longing, God opened Rachel's womb, and she gave birth to a son, Joseph, who would later become the powerful prime minister of Egypt. The years that followed were filled with trials for Jacob, Leah, Rachel, and their growing family. However, from these marriages, Jacob's 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel, marking the beginning of a great nation, a nation chosen and blessed by God. Jacob flees from Laban. Jacob stood on a hill, gazing over the vast fields where his flocks of sheep and goats grazed. It was time to leave. God had spoken to him, "Return to your homeland, to your family, and I will be with you." Jacob knew he could not inform Laban of his plans. Laban was too cunning and would do everything in his power to stop him. So one night, while Laban was away shearing his sheep, Jacob gathered his wives and children. He told them about the injustices he had endured over the years and about God's command to leave. Rachel and Leah agreed with him, saying that their father no longer treated them as daughters, but as strangers. Without hesitation, Jacob quietly gathered all his livestock, servants, and possessions, and led his family away. 3 days later, news reached Laban. Furious that Jacob had left without informing him, he gathered his household, mounted his horse, and set out in pursuit. After 7 days, Laban and his men caught up with Jacob in the hill country of Gilead. That night, before Laban could confront Jacob, God appeared to him in a dream and warned, "Be careful, do not say anything to Jacob, whether good or bad." The next morning, when Laban confronted Jacob, he reproached him. "Why did you run away secretly, taking my daughters as if they were captives? If you had told me, I would have sent you off with joy, with singing and music. But you did not even allow me to kiss my daughters and grandchildren goodbye. You have acted foolishly." Jacob replied, "I was afraid that if I told you, you would not let me go. For 20 years, I have worked hard for you. You have changed my wages 10 times, but God did not allow you to harm me. If the God of my fathers, the God of Abraham and Isaac, had not been with me, I would have left empty-handed. But he has seen my suffering and my toil, and last night he warned you." In the end, Laban and Jacob made a peace treaty. They set up a pile of stones as a memorial, and Laban declared, "This pile of stones will be a witness between us. You must not harm my daughters or take any other wives. God will be our witness." After making the covenant, they shared a meal together. The next morning, Laban bid farewell to his daughters and grandchildren, then returned to his land. Jacob continued his journey, leading his family and possessions toward Canaan. But he knew that a great challenge awaited him ahead, the encounter with Esau, the brother he had deceived 20 years earlier. Jacob wrestles with God. That night, Jacob stood alone by the banks of the Jabbok River. Tomorrow, he would face Esau, the brother he had deceived 20 years earlier, to steal the blessing. Jacob had already sent his family and all his possessions across the river, but he remained behind, alone. The stillness of the night was suddenly broken. From the darkness, a man appeared and lunged at Jacob, seizing him in a fierce struggle. Jacob did not know who this man was. An attacker? An angel? Or was it God himself? He had no time to think, only to fight with all his strength. They wrestled in the shadows, their breath heavy, sweat mixing with the dust of the earth. The man could not overpower Jacob, but neither could Jacob defeat him. As dawn approached, the stranger touched Jacob's hip, and instantly his hip was wrenched out of its socket, sending a wave of unbearable pain through his body. Yet even in agony, Jacob refused to let go. Clutching tightly to the man, his whole body trembling, he declared with unwavering determination, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man paused, looking at Jacob for a long moment, then asked, "What is your name?" Gasping for breath, Jacob answered, "Jacob." The man nodded and declared, "From now on, you will no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, because you have wrestled with God and with men, and you have prevailed." Jacob stood frozen in awe. This was no ordinary battle. He had wrestled with God himself. As the man departed, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. Jacob, now limping from his dislocated hip, took slow, deliberate steps forward. Yet within him, something profound had changed. He named that place Peniel, meaning face of God, because he had seen God face to face and lived. The next day, as he approached Esau, his heart was no longer filled with fear. He was no longer the same man. He was no longer Jacob, the deceiver. He was Israel, the one who wrestled with God and was transformed. That night's struggle was not just a physical battle, it was a battle of the soul. And in that struggle, Jacob did not merely receive a blessing, he found himself. Jacob meets Esau. The sun rose over the horizon, painting the hilltops with a golden glow. Jacob stood on a hill, his eyes fixed on the distance, where a cloud of dust signaled the approach of a great company. It was Esau, the brother he had deceived 20 years earlier. 2 decades ago, Jacob had cunningly stolen Esau's blessing from their father, Isaac. Fearing Esau's wrath and the threat of death, he had fled to Haran, seeking refuge with his uncle Laban. Now, after 20 years, Jacob was returning home, bringing with him his family, vast herds of livestock, and the weight of his past. But the news he received sent a chill through his spine. Esau was coming with 400 men. Was this a sign of vengeance? Jacob could not be sure, but fear surged through him. Then he remembered God's promise. "I will be with you and make your descendants as numerous as the sand on the seashore." Yet at this moment, faith and fear waged war in his heart. He quickly took action. First, he divided his people and flocks into 2 groups, thinking that if Esau attacked one, the other might escape. Then, he prepared a great gift to send ahead to Esau in an attempt to calm his anger. 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 nursing camels with their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. Jacob instructed his servants to go ahead with the gifts, each group separated by some distance. He told them, "If Esau asks, tell him, 'These are gifts from your servant Jacob, sent to my lord Esau. He is coming behind us.'" Hoping to awaken Esau's kindness, Jacob spent the night alone. As the sun rose, Jacob gathered his family. He arranged them carefully, his maidservants and their children first, followed by Leah and her children, then Rachel and Joseph at the rear. Then Jacob stepped forward ahead of them all, bowing to the ground 7 times as he approached Esau. Esau saw Jacob, the brother he had once hated, stood before him, humbled, waiting for his fate. A tense silence filled the air. Then suddenly, Esau ran toward Jacob. Jacob clenched his fists, bracing for the worst, but instead of a sword, he felt strong arms wrapping around him. Esau embraced Jacob and wept. The 2 brothers stood there, in the wilderness, their tears carried away by the morning breeze. Years of hatred melted like dust in the wind. Esau looked around and saw the women and children. He asked, "Who are these with you?" Jacob replied, "They are the children God has graciously given me." One by one, Jacob's wives and children stepped forward and bowed before Esau. Esau then noticed the gifts Jacob had sent and said, "I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what is yours." But Jacob insisted, "Please accept them. Seeing your face is like seeing the face of God, for you have received me with kindness." Finally, Esau accepted the gifts. Then he said, "Let us journey together." But Jacob, concerned for his family and the fragile livestock, carefully declined. "Please go ahead, my lord. I will follow at a slower pace until we arrive." Esau agreed and returned to Seir, while Jacob went to Succoth. From there, he continued his journey to Canaan, where he would build an altar to God, the one who had protected him through every step of his long journey home. Joseph's dream. Night fell over the land of Hebron, where Jacob and his family lived. Joseph, the son of Jacob and Rachel, was a bright and upright young man. Though he was the youngest among his 11 brothers, he was loved by his father more than any of them. One morning, Joseph awoke with eyes shining with excitement. As the family gathered together, he eagerly shared, "Listen to my dream. In my dream, we were out in the field binding sheaves of grain. Suddenly, my sheaf stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to mine." Tension filled the air. Joseph's brothers exchanged glances, their eyes filled with jealousy and anger. Finally, one of them spoke. "Do you think you will rule over us? Do you really believe we will bow down to you?" From that day on, their jealousy toward Joseph deepened. They could not bear the thought of their youngest brother rising above them. But then, another night brought another dream, one even stranger than before. At dawn, Joseph could not contain his excitement and shared it with his father and brothers. "In my dream, I saw the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowing down before me." Jacob, Joseph's loving father, furrowed his brows for the first time. With a serious tone, he asked, Do you really think your father, your mother, and your brothers will bow before you?" Though he reprimanded his son, Jacob did not dismiss the dream. He kept it in his heart, sensing that it might be a divine sign of Joseph's future. But to Joseph's brothers, this dream was nothing less than an insult. Their jealousy turned into hatred, and they began plotting to rid themselves of their arrogant younger brother. Joseph had no idea that his dreams were a prophecy of his destiny, that one day he would rise to great power, and those who despised him would indeed bow before him. Soon, his own brothers would sell him into slavery, sending him far away to Egypt. He would endure years of hardship before his dream became reality. But through it all, one thing remained unchanged. God had a plan for Joseph. Joseph and Potiphar's wife, the scorching sun shone over the land of Egypt, where grand palaces and fertile rivers had built a mighty empire. Inside the magnificent estate of Potiphar, the chief officer of Pharaoh, a young man worked diligently, his face radiant with wisdom and devotion. This was Joseph, the beloved son of Jacob, who had once been betrayed and sold into slavery by his own brothers. Potiphar had purchased Joseph from the Ishmaelite merchants and quickly recognized the young man's excellence. Before long, Joseph was entrusted with the management of Potiphar's entire household and possessions. Joseph was not only intelligent and trustworthy, but also youthful and strikingly handsome. Potiphar's wife, a woman of power and pride, began to take notice of him. One day, when Potiphar was away, she approached Joseph directly and said, "Lie with me." Her words were like a sharp blade piercing through Joseph's loyalty, not only to his master, but more importantly, to God. Joseph stepped back, his eyes firm yet respectful. "Madam, my master has entrusted everything in this house to me. He has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I commit such a great sin against God?" But the woman did not relent. Day after day, she continued her attempts to seduce Joseph, yet he remained steadfast, avoiding her and keeping himself pure. Then came the fateful day when no one else was in the house. Potiphar's wife saw her chance. Joseph entered as usual to carry out his duties, unaware that she was waiting in the shadows, consumed by desire. As he passed by, she grabbed his cloak tightly and whispered, "Lie with me." This time, Joseph had no choice. He could not stay. He could not reason with her or decline politely. With a forceful pull, he broke free, leaving his cloak in her hands, and fled the house. Rage and humiliation burned within the woman's heart. Clutching the cloak, her breath quickened, and her eyes darkened with malice. If she could not have Joseph, she would destroy him. At once, she screamed, summoning the household servants. When they rushed in, she wept and pointed at the cloak. "Look, this Hebrew slave that my husband brought here tried to violate me, but I screamed, and he ran away, leaving his cloak behind." When Potiphar returned home, she repeated the tale, adding words of fury and betrayal. Potiphar looked at the cloak. Then he looked at Joseph, the young man he had trusted completely. Finally, he commanded, "Throw him into prison." And so, Joseph was cast into the dungeon, imprisoned for a crime he had never committed. But even in the darkness of the prison, God did not abandon Joseph. He did not despair. He did not lose faith. And it was within the prison walls that his destiny would take another turn. Joseph could have given in easily, but he chose to remain faithful to God, even at the cost of his own freedom. And because of his faithfulness, God blessed him, raising him from a slave to become one of the greatest rulers of Egypt. The cupbearer and the baker. Darkness and dampness filled the royal prison of Egypt. The cold stone walls reflected the dim flickering of torches, casting a faint glow on Joseph's contemplative face. The sound of chains echoed from the depths of the prison, where men of various fates were held, some guilty, some innocent, but all sharing the same reality. They had been forgotten. Joseph, the beloved son of Jacob, was once a free man, cherished by his father. But now he was a prisoner, falsely accused and locked away for a crime he had not committed. Yet even in the midst of his suffering, Joseph never lost his faith in God. Because of his wisdom and integrity, He gained the trust of the prison warden, who appointed him to oversee the other prisoners. The arrival of the cupbearer and the baker. One day, 2 new prisoners were brought into the dungeon, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker. Once high-ranking officials in the royal court, they had somehow displeased Pharaoh and found themselves thrown into the very prison where Joseph was confined. Joseph, in his daily duties, cared for them and soon noticed a deep sorrow in their eyes, a burden heavier than mere imprisonment. One morning, as he approached them, he saw that their faces were even more troubled than usual. He asked, "Why do you look so sad today?" They sighed and replied, "We have both had strange dreams, but there is no one to interpret them." Joseph smiled, his eyes filled with faith in God. He said, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer's dream. The chief cupbearer spoke first. "In my dream, I saw a vine before me. On the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. I was holding Pharaoh's cup in my hand, so I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in his hand." Joseph listened carefully, then smiled. He said, "This is the meaning of your dream. The 3 branches represent 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you to your position. You will once again place the cup in Pharaoh's hand, just as you did before." The cupbearer's eyes lit up with hope. Joseph continued, his voice gentle but full of meaning. "But when you are restored, please remember me. Speak of me to Pharaoh and help me get out of this place. I have done nothing to deserve imprisonment. I was taken from the land of the Hebrews, and I have committed no crime worthy of being here." The cupbearer nodded, his heart stirred with new hope. The baker's dream. Seeing that the cupbearer's dream had a favorable interpretation, the chief baker eagerly shared his own. "In my dream, I had 3 baskets of bread on my head. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but birds came and ate them from the basket on my head." But this time, Joseph did not smile. He sighed, his voice slow and solemn. "This is the meaning of your dream. The 3 baskets represent 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will execute you. You will be hanged, and the birds will eat your flesh." A heavy silence filled the room. The baker's face turned pale, his heart weighed down by dread. Pharaoh's dreams. Nightfall descended upon Egypt, enveloping the mighty kingdom in a solemn silence. Gentle desert winds brushed past the banks of the Nile. Inside the grand palace, Pharaoh, the powerful ruler of Egypt, reclined on his royal bed, closed his eyes, and drifted into deep sleep. Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile, the great river that nourished all of Egypt. As he gazed at the shimmering water, suddenly, 7 fat, healthy cows emerged from the river. They were strong, with sleek coats, full of life. They leisurely grazed along the riverbank, a symbol of abundance and prosperity. But then, from the water, 7 other cows rose, thin, ugly, and gaunt, appearing as though they had suffered from starvation for a long time. Their ribs protruded through their wrinkled skin. The emaciated cows approached and devoured the fat, healthy ones. Strangely, even after swallowing the 7 fat cows, they remained as thin as before, showing no signs of improvement. Pharaoh jolted awake, his heart filled with confusion, but realizing it was just a dream, he calmed himself and fell back asleep. Yet Pharaoh's sleep did not remain peaceful for long. He dreamed again. This time, he saw a field of grain before him. In the field, 7 plump golden ears of grain sprouted, shining like the sun, full of life. But then, suddenly, 7 withered, shriveled ears of grain grew beside them, dried up by the scorching east wind, lifeless and brittle. And then, the dreadful event occurred. The withered ears swallowed up the 7 full, healthy ones. Pharaoh awoke abruptly, breathing heavily. These strange dreams were not mere coincidences. Something important was being revealed to him by God. The next morning, Pharaoh summoned all the magicians, diviners, and wise counselors in his palace. He recounted his dreams and demanded an interpretation. but none could provide a satisfying explanation. Pharaoh's anxiety grew stronger. Then, at that very moment, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, who had been imprisoned 2 years earlier, suddenly remembered something he had long forgotten. He recalled a Hebrew prisoner, a young man who had accurately interpreted his dream and that of the royal baker. Hastily, he approached Pharaoh and said, "My lord, when I was imprisoned, a young Hebrew man interpreted my dream and that of the baker, and everything happened exactly as he said. I believe he can explain your dreams." Immediately, Pharaoh ordered Joseph to be brought out of prison. From the darkness of his cell, Joseph was summoned, shaved, given clean garments, and led into the magnificent palace. Standing before Pharaoh, he bowed respectfully, yet there was no fear in his heart. Pharaoh looked at Joseph and said, "I have heard that you can interpret dreams." Joseph humbly replied, "It is not I, but God, who will give Pharaoh an answer of peace." Pharaoh recounted his 2 dreams, and Joseph listened attentively, his eyes filled with understanding. When Pharaoh finished speaking, Joseph explained, "The 2 dreams of your majesty are actually one, for God has determined that this will surely come to pass. The 7 fat cows and the 7 full ears of grain represent 7 years of abundance. Egypt will experience 7 years of great prosperity, with bountiful harvests and overflowing wealth. But the 7 thin cows and the 7 withered ears of grain symbolize the 7 years that will follow, a time of terrible famine. The famine will be so severe that people will forget the years of plenty. And the fact that the dream was given twice means that God has firmly decreed it, and it will happen soon." Pharaoh and his officials were astonished. How could Egypt prepare for such a calamity? But Joseph did not bring only prophecy. He brought a solution. "Your Majesty should appoint a wise and discerning man to oversee the land. During the 7 years of abundance, store up grain, build granaries filled with food, so that when the 7 years of famine come, the nation will have enough to survive. If this is done, Egypt will not perish from hunger." Pharaoh sat in silence for a moment. Then he rose, looked around at his officials, and declared, "Can we find anyone as wise and insightful as this man? Since God has revealed this to him, who could rule better than he?" Turning to Joseph, Pharaoh proclaimed, "You shall govern all of Egypt. Only the throne will be above you. From this day forward, you are the vizier of Egypt." In a single day, Joseph went from an unknown prisoner to the second most powerful man in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. He was given royal garments, a signet ring, and a special chariot. Pharaoh's dreams had opened the door to Joseph's destiny, a destiny that would not only save Egypt, but also his own family, the very brothers who had once betrayed him. For even in the darkness of the prison, God had been preparing Joseph for a great mission. Joseph's brothers go to Egypt. The scorching sun cast shadows over the barren fields of Canaan. The prolonged drought had dried up the rivers, and once fertile lands had turned into cracked, parched soil. Famine ravaged the region, and Jacob's family was no exception. Jacob, now old, sat in front of his tent, his eyes filled with concern for his children and livestock. He knew that without food, his family would not survive. Then he heard news that in Egypt, thanks to the wisdom of a mysterious vizier, the land had stored abundant grain. He immediately called his sons and said, "Why are you standing here looking at each other? I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some so that we may not die of hunger." Jacob's 10 eldest sons hurriedly prepared for the journey. However, he did not allow Benjamin, his beloved youngest son, to go with them, fearing that something terrible might happen to him, just like what had happened to Joseph, the son he believed had died long ago. After many days of travel, Jacob's 10 sons arrived in Egypt. They were led to the place where food was distributed, and there they met the vizier of the land, a powerful man, dressed in splendor, standing on a high platform. They had no idea that the man staring at them was none other than Joseph, their brother, whom they had sold into slavery 20 years ago. But Joseph recognized them immediately. He looked at the familiar faces, faces that had haunted his nightmares during all those years in prison. But now he was no longer the young man betrayed by his brothers. He was the vizier of Egypt, holding power over life and death. Joseph's brothers bowed before him, just as in the dream he had seen in his youth, the dream of sheaves of grain bowing before his sheaf. Yet, Joseph did not reveal his identity. Instead, he played the role of a stern official, questioning them with authority. "Where do you come from?" They respectfully replied, "My lord, we have come from the land of Canaan to buy food." Joseph pretended to be suspicious and shouted, "You are spies. You have come to scout the land." His brothers were terrified and quickly defended themselves. "No, my lord, we are honest men. We are all sons of one man. We had 12 brothers. The youngest is with our father at home, and one is no more." Hearing this, Joseph felt a sharp pain in his heart. They still believed he was dead, but he did not reveal the truth just yet. He wanted to test them. Joseph spoke sternly, "If you are truly honest men, leave one of you here while the rest take food back to your family. But if you wish to buy grain again, you must bring your youngest brother here. Otherwise, you will not be welcomed." Then he ordered that Simeon be taken and imprisoned before their eyes. His brothers were shocked and spoke among themselves in Hebrew, thinking the vizier did not understand their language. "Surely we are being punished for what we did to Joseph. When he begged us for mercy, we did not listen. Now this disaster has come upon us." Joseph stood nearby, hearing everything. They did not know that he understood every word. His heart was overwhelmed with emotion, but he kept his face stern. Before letting them go, Joseph secretly ordered his servants to return their silver into their grain sacks as another test. When his brothers arrived home and opened their sacks, they were stunned to find their silver still inside. In panic, they told their father, "We don't understand why the money is in our sacks." That vizier was very strict. He kept Simeon and commanded that if we do not bring Benjamin, we will not be allowed back in Egypt. Jacob was in agony. He had lost Joseph, and now he had lost Simeon. He could not bear to lose Benjamin, the only son left of Rachel. But as the famine grew worse, the food supply dwindled. Jacob was forced to face the harsh reality. If they did not take Benjamin to Egypt, they would starve. Jacob, worried as food ran low, reluctantly sent his sons back to Egypt with Benjamin, despite his fears. Judah promised to protect Benjamin, and Jacob instructed them to bring gifts and double the silver. Upon arriving, Joseph, recognizing Benjamin, was overcome with emotion, but kept his identity secret. He inquired about their father and blessed Benjamin. Overwhelmed, he left the room to weep privately. Joseph invited them to dine at his palace, causing fear among his brothers, who thought they were being punished for the silver found in their sacks. The steward reassured them, saying God had blessed them. During the meal, Joseph seated them in birth order, astonishing them. Benjamin received 5 times more food. The gathering was joyful, but Joseph was still testing his brothers' true intentions. Joseph devised one final test to determine if his brothers had truly changed. He ordered his steward to place his silver cup in Benjamin's sack. As they departed, Egyptian soldiers pursued them and accused them of theft. The brothers, unaware of the scheme, denied the accusation, but when the cup was found in Benjamin's sack, they were devastated. Brought back to Joseph, they pleaded for mercy. Judah, once responsible for selling Joseph, now offered himself as a slave in place of Benjamin, fearing their father's grief. Seeing his brother's transformation, Joseph could no longer contain his emotions. He revealed his identity, assuring them that God had sent him ahead to save lives. Overcome with emotion, they embraced, and forgiveness replaced years of betrayal. Joseph arranged for his family to settle in Egypt. Before leaving Canaan, Jacob sought God's guidance, receiving assurance that this was part of his divine plan. Upon arriving in Egypt, Joseph and Jacob shared a tearful reunion. Jacob later blessed Pharaoh, acknowledging God's sovereignty. Settling in the land of Goshen, the Israelites thrived. Jacob, Israel, the man whom God renamed Israel, lived a long life filled with ups and downs. When old age came upon him, he and his family settled in Goshen, Egypt, under the protection of Joseph, the son he once thought was lost. In his final days, Jacob lived in peace, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. However, he knew that this was not the final resting place of his people. Knowing that his time of departure was near, Jacob gathered his 12 sons to bless them and prophesy about their future. These were prophetic words, determining the destiny of each tribe in the future. As all his sons knelt before his bed, Jacob began to pronounce blessings and prophecies.